Hey, everybody, welcome back to another installment of the Can We Please Talk podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
And I'm Nick Severi.
Got a special episode for everybody today. We're going to be speaking in a little while with author Ish Verduzco. He's also a social media marketer, formerly at LinkedIn. He's worked at Snapchat. So he's worked at a bunch of different places, but his new book that's out is How Successful People Get Ish Done. Play on his name, and it's a 7-step framework to how someone can achieve their goals. So it's a very interesting topic that we're going to be speaking with Ish about tonight. But first, before we get into our episode, obviously Nick and I are taping tonight, January 6th, and today's events that happened in the Capitol in Washington D.C. Were very troubling for the majority of Americans, and it should be troubling for a lot of people out there watching and seeing the events that unfolded. Obviously, today was the day that Congress was going to count the Electoral College votes and certify Joe Biden as 46th president of the United States. And that kind of got disrupted. And even as we're taping this episode right now, Congress is still in session, talking about the objections and the different issues that are going on with that. Nick, what did you make of today, and watching the events unfold and play out today?
It's a mix of emotions. I was up last night, like many people, um, seeing just watching the returns come in for the Georgia runoff.
Right.
So I was up till about 1 in the morning. So saw the projection for Reverend Warnock to defeat Kelly Loeffler. And when I went to bed, Ossoff was down about 3,000 votes this morning. He took the lead by about 10,000 as DeKalb County had come in. All the returns are coming in. So, you got that one feeling there as to the Senate about to go to 50-50 with soon to be Vice President Harris being the deciding vote. And on the flip side, today you have what happened in the Capitol, which was essentially nothing short of a coup. About 30 minutes after the vote for the certification for Arizona's electoral votes had been presented to the floor, because as we all know, each state basically, they put the electoral votes out there, no objection, you move forward. As we all guessed, Arizona being one of those contested states, that's when the debate began. And you saw comments from Senator Cruz and some others who were just openly questioning this process. And now Senator Cruz was asking for some commission to be created,
Right.
which I just heard the senator from Oklahoma say is very likely not to happen. And I think he was one of the 16 people that was, going to object. And I think with today's recent events, that's going to change. But
Yeah.
what we saw today was an attempted coup, not a successful one because there's no military presence. This isn't what you've seen in other countries. This is just citizens that. And there's a larger conversation to be had about the ability for them to get into the Capitol building and really not
Oh, yeah.
get the kind of treatment that other protesters would get, at the hands of the police department.
Right.
But they've been all rooted out, and now the vote goes back to both houses of Congress.
Yeah, we wanted to touch upon it at the top because Chuck Schumer said something in his comments tonight that I thought was pretty impactful about today, probably being another one of those days that will live in infamy alongside December 7th, with Pearl Harbor, and September 11th with 9/11. Um, it's like you said at the top, the mix of emotions, because the lead up to this, right? Everyone knew what day this was, and the president had been tweeting about this day, and there had been already talks of, protesters coming to DC. And obviously, we know of a few people that live in the DC area. We interviewed Sabina Rodriguez, who's a reporter for Politico, that was not up on the Hill today, but in DC at her home. So it's a little bit troubling to see something like that unfold at the nation's capital. Even the police officer that we had on in the recent episode, he patrols the Prince George, Maryland area, and his department had gotten summons to help out, with some of the crowd control. So there's the mix of emotions there, because personally people that are living in the area, working in the area, and also working law enforcement in the area. But then there's the other part of it, right? The actual congressional issue playing out, and democracy, that's kind of being played out before us right now. And I think Nick and I, in the coming weeks, we're going to try our hardest to, put together an episode, with some experts from a historical context, because today is unprecedented. This is This has never happened in over 200 years of a storming, of our nation's capital, and some of the buildings by protesters. And also, like Nick, like you mentioned, right, the police response. We could analyze that from various different angles with other, police experts that have worked or patrolled in the area as to why there wasn't more security. Everyone knew that this was taking place, and there was a preference put on, obviously, making sure the senators and House of Representative people were safe. And then that's why property was kind of like not guarded. But either way, it's such a crazy day. It's a day that we probably never thought we would see in American history, and it happened and it played out before our eyes. And we're gonna devote some time to an episode in the coming weeks regarding all of this, because it's pretty hectic. But let me shift gears to tonight's guest, because I think tonight's episode, and the guest that we have coming on is really fantastic. Ishra Dusko, learned about him recently through a social post, and like I mentioned at the top, he's formerly a social media marketer at LinkedIn. He's worked at Snapchat in the diversity and inclusion section of trying to get more, people of color working in the tech industry. And then he's recently written a couple different books. So one, a social media playbook on like how to maximize your social media, but then also this recent book, how successful people get ish done, really looks at, hundreds and thousands of hours of successful people, the Kobe Bryants, Oprah Winfrey's, Michael Jordan's, Bill Gates of the world, and the how do they achieve their goals, and how do they continue to set new goals and really, sustain that level. And I think it's really interesting what he's been able to put pen to paper and publish with this book. Nick, I know you've had a chance to read the book as well. What are your thoughts on Ish's book and his story overall?
One thing I like about his book is the level of research. It's funny for anyone here who's watching this through video. Some of the books that are, I think the general tone of the books that Ish speaks to are sort of like littered on my bookshelf, and I've read them for a variety of reasons, both personally and professionally. But a lot of times, what you see in common with those kinds of books is this idea that you're collecting anecdotes. These different stories of people who do, who are successful. What Ish does, which I appreciated, was applying some of the elements of neuroscience that are part of this conversation. It's actually, if you had to blend the books, it feels a little like Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, but also combined with Good to Great, by I forget the author's last name, Jim Collins. So you've got that blending of like sort of business and success in that field with also the neuroscience behind it. Also coupled with that storytelling practice that does work well in these kinds of books. And Ish does a great job of basically taking the heavy lift off all of us to read all these different texts, and just kind of give it more of a how-to guide.
Yeah, and it's, one of the things that I found interesting, and again, since I've been following him on social, but even that he mentions in the book about the ability of learning, right? Whether it's through podcasts, whether it's through actually reading, and like you said, the neuroscience behind it. There's a lot of psychology in the book that he points to from different psychologists from. Across the landscape, and so it's a super interesting topic. And also, one of the things he speaks to about, Nick, you and I obviously know this personally, being people of color, the diversity part, right? And one of the reasons why he said he wrote the book was doesn't see a lot of people that look and sound like him writing about this subject matter, right? And the psychology of, how people achieve these type of goals and maintain this greatness. So very excited to talk to him tonight, and we just can't wait. All right, joining us now, as we mentioned earlier, he worked in social media marketer at LinkedIn. He's worked at Snapchat, but he recently wrote a book. It's called How Successful People Get Ish Done, a 7-step framework to achieving your goals. And that's Ish Radusco. Ish, Mike Leon, Nick Zavari, thanks for hopping out with us tonight, man.
Thank you so much for having me. This is it's great to connect with you all finally, and I'm excited to be on the show.
Yeah, no, we really appreciate you coming on. I was telling you off air this, I connected with you on social media about something else. And your story just kind of spoke to me, obviously, being a Latino and Just tell our audience a little bit about yourself, like your upbringing. I know you grew up with Mexican parents in Southern California. Like, just tell everybody, our audience, a little bit about yourself and how you got into writing.
Yeah, of course. So again, thank you for having me. So I'm from Southern California. My family is Mexican. I'm Mexican American. Actually just had dinner with my grandmother. She is only speaks Spanish. She doesn't really speak much English. Very traditional, like Mexican grandmother, you know. And so I moved a lot growing up. I would say I think I moved like 12 times by the time I hit high school. Um, 12 times, yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
But just moving from like, apartments to living with family to living with more family to other apartments and then finally landing a house and then trying just to like slowly but surely move up the ranks in terms of like socioeconomic background. So that, me and my younger sisters didn't grow up in like super cutty, super rough areas. My mom was always looking to try to, elevate us and push us down the route of education and not being like out in the streets or doing dumb stuff, even though it was available to us.
Mhm.
Um, so I moved a lot growing up. I went to high school out in the Inland Empire, so Rancho Cucamonga, if you all know where that's at, and then ended up going to college at UC Merced. So UC Merced is a really special place because I think it's somewhere around like 50 to 60% first gen college students there. So the first in their family to go to college, and it's really, really amazing school. I always like whenever I have an opportunity to give them a shout out. It's a really cool place. Um, but yeah, that's a little bit overview of like where I'm from, how I was like growing up. My mom had me at 19 years old, so she was a very young parent trying to figure things out as she was growing up. I give her all the credit in the world for doing everything that she did to, set the foundation for me and who I am today. And super grateful for every life experience that I've had. I guess one more thing that I'll highlight, and then we could jump in the interview, is when I was 12, about to turn 13, my dad actually passed away. So that is one major life moment that I always like to highlight, just because it's probably the most life changing moment that I've ever had, and it's something from that moment forward kind of changed the way that I look at the world and just my mental framing of how grateful we should be just to like live life. And that mental framework plays a role into everything that I do. And you see it in my work online, you see it in my character, you see it in the way I present myself, just because I have that vision of like, wow, I'm grateful that I'm even alive right now because tomorrow really isn't ever granted. I'm going to make use of every single moment I have every single day and do the things that I enjoy doing and help people like me, you know.
In your book early on, you mentioned a little bit about, not a little bit about, these different cognitive phenomena, I think is one way to put it.
Hmm.
Um, and one that came up to me was around narrative bias, about the stories that we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
Just kind of, just sharing for a moment. If you can just expand on that, just sort of, what is that power of narrative storytelling that we tell ourselves, that we share with the world, and what is it? What role did it play for you, and just in the way you sort of see yourself and your own growth? But what is that concept?
Yeah. So internal narrative that we have is one of the most powerful things that can uplift us or tear it to the ground. I believe and from all the research that I've done from all the successful people that I've studied, it's one of the differentiating factors that puts them apart from everybody else. If you can imagine that internal monologue that you're always having when you're taking a shower, when you're like waking up in the morning, when you're going on a walk, when you're driving, there's always that internal monologue that's thinking a million different things, and one of those like series of thoughts is how we see ourselves. And the the way you see yourself and the way you talk to yourself in your head and even out loud in your actions and the way you present yourself formally to others, that eventually becomes true, whether it's good or bad. And so I think tying it back to my story, at a very young age, losing your dad, moving around a lot, always being the new kid on the block, I could have gone complete opposite and said like, my life sucks. I'm a loser. All negative, all bad things happen to me, and that would have made my life true from that point on. I would have been tasked with bad luck because I would have been looking for bad luck. I would have, you know, found every bad thing in my life, whether that's like, not having the flashiest clothes or the shoes or the phone. And those little things would have started to make myself think poorly of myself, started to put myself down over time. Luckily, I kind of went the other way. And I think it's because of my grandparents and my parents as well. They really ingrained like self-love and also just like treating others with respect and being grateful for like every little thing that we have. Like my grandparents from both sides of my family migrated here, like 30 years ago, no, longer than that, like 40 years ago. So when they came, all they had was like their 5, 6, 7 kids, and they raised them on their own. So when I heard those stories growing up, it was really difficult for me to have that negative self-talk about myself, because I always had something to compare it to. It's like, I can't talk shit to myself because my grandma literally had nothing, beans and rice, like the typical immigrant story. Like, I can't say that I deserve the new Sidekick or the new iPhone or these new Jordans, or I can't talk poorly about myself when my grandma was over here looking at life so positively and she literally had nothing,
Ish, there's a bunch of different topics in the book that you cover. And one of the things I found interesting, and I quoted the passage that you said something in respect to nowadays, it's not about acquiring and learning the info, but it's about valuing and interpreting the info.
hmm
I think that sentence is so apropos for what is going on in today's world, especially in the realm of politics, journalism, but it's also happening in education where you're seeing that it's like, what are you learning? And it's like, no, shouldn't you be like interpreting what you're learning? I would love for you to
Yep.
expand more on that phrase and why you put that in the book and kind of what it means to you.
Yeah, that saying or that passage is so near and dear to my heart, mainly because I should have mentioned this during my upbringing part, but I wasn't a great student growing up. And when you look at, I don't know, from like third grade to even college when I graduated, I wasn't like the straight A student, not even like, I was maybe like a B student in high school. But the issue that I always had with school is I didn't like memorizing things just to be able to prove to somebody that I was able to memorize it and regurgitate it back to them. When you look at the subjects that I really did poorly at, it was, reading, history. It was like English and history were the two main ones where you had to go memorize something, act like you acquired the information, but just short term be able to regurgitate it back on a test or on a quiz or exam or whatever, and then get a certain grade for somebody to tell you you are smart, and then you basically forget it moving forward. That's not fully understanding information, that's temporarily acquiring it. And that's kind of my issue with the traditional educational system, is like we grant people and we grade people and we reward them based on the ability, most of the time it's based on the ability to memorize. And that doesn't play out in the real world. All three of us on this call know that. You can't memorize something and go tell it to your boss and you keep your job in the long term. That doesn't work. You have to be able to fully digest what you're being taught and then put it into action, which helps you understand it even better. And then you become smarter or better at whatever it is that you're doing. But growing up and you're not told that you're the best student or the smartest student because you're not able to do these things and memorize as well as others. And I learned English and Spanish at the same time, so it would show itself in my writing. I would always do weird tenses where like it's future tense, but it should be present tense or past tense or stuff like that. And when you look at my story now, it's like I wrote a book. I work at all these amazing tech companies. Like I've DJ'd around the world, and my ability to be able to memorize things like the traditional school system says you should, did nothing to help any of that.
The educator in me gets excited when you talk about that because, I think we did an episode on education and, Mike asked me a bunch of questions. And, one thing I always talk about is, Bloom's taxonomy, that framework of, on the lower end about education is about this concept of recall. But on the higher end, we talk about synthesis, and talking about actually like practical application or analysis.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate you sort of speaking to that. I'll connect this to what we talked about with narrative bias earlier. So as a
Yep.
student, there was a story you're telling yourself from what you were just sharing about what is the system of education you are currently in, um, to the learner that you are now. Along the way, how did you disrupt those stories that you were sort of hearing around you from teachers and just the world that you were in, as far as, who you are, quote unquote, as a student, to actually what is your learning preference and the learning and your style? And because you in your book talk about the power of learning and how to be more aggressive about being intentional about it almost on a daily basis. So how did you
Yeah.
disrupt that story? What's the new story that exists for you as a learner?
So I don't think I became great at learning until my early 20s, which is crazy to think of. When I was in high school and middle school and even most of college, um, when I truthfully 110% honestly reflect on myself during that time of like going to school, I I went to school and I got decent grades however I could, by doing a ton of extra credit, by like, cramming before tests as much as I could. But I don't think that makes you great at learning. That just makes you really good at being able to like figure out these hacks to memorize. Like, if there's 10 quizzes, practice quizzes, I would take them 10 different times just to get really good at trying to like take those quizzes. So that did nothing again to my ability to like absorb information. I will credit one person. So when I was in ninth grade, I was again not great at reading or writing, and there was I was on the soccer team, and one of the baseball coaches, like everybody on the sports teams in high school, kind of like knows each other. It's like a community, and he was actually an avid English teacher, and Avid was like this is a program that helped students go from like maybe decent reading or decent like ninth grade reading to like more advanced. So like to fast track to the AP classes basically. And he pulled me aside one day and said like, "Hey Ish, I know you're struggling with some of your classes. I've talked to like your teacher, I think he said, and he's like, I would love for you to join my class." And it was really weird for me because it felt like I'm the dumbest kid in this class already, and you want me to join a smarter class so I could be the dumbest kid in that class? Like, what do you
Hmm.
see in me? I didn't ask him that, but reflecting now on that time, just somebody being able to believe in you when, especially in a subject where you tell yourself that you're not good at, or the system itself has proven that you're not good at it. That gave me like a level of self confidence that I didn't know I needed, but I genuinely did. And going back to answer your second part of your question, I didn't become an active learner. I didn't go out and seek knowledge until my early 20s. So again, in college and in high school, I was very active, but all in like clubs and activities, ASB, sports. I did 3 or 4 different sports, swim team, soccer team, etc. Right? College, exact same. I went to school so that I can do all these different activities, like planning concerts, playing sports, um, internships, business clubs, all that stuff. So I found fun and energy by building and creating things. I didn't find fun in the schoolwork itself, which is really bad to say. But it wasn't until I was like 22 or 23, and I write this in the book, maybe 23, 24, is when I stumbled upon my first self-development book. So for the first time since maybe I had read Harry Potter when I was like 12 or 10 years, 11 years old, I picked up a book and read it on my own without anybody telling me that I had to, without anybody forcing me or telling me that there was a quiz tied to it. And it made reading and learning so much fun. I've read that book now like 10 different times. The book is called Smart Cuts by Shane Snow. And it's very like, one of the best books that I could recommend. It essentially breaks down how like very successful people, especially like in the elite successful people, are able to fast track their way to success. So if it takes 20 to 30 years to achieve a certain thing traditionally, they are able to flip that narrative on its head and say, how can I do it in 5? If it traditionally takes you, I don't know, 100 hours to complete something, how can they do it in 10 and do it twice as good, basically? And that just blew my mind. When I was reading this book, I found myself just absorbed for the first time. I don't think I read a book in all of college or all of high school, even though, there's books that we were supposed to read. I would just read the Cliff Notes, or I would watch the documentaries or watch the movies and try to get by with a C plus or whatever I could, So I'm happy that I found learning later in life, or like now, better than like way later in life, I guess what I'm trying to say.
Right. Ish, one of the things I learned in the book, and I was telling my wife this earlier today, and by the way, we should mention Ish just recently got engaged, so
I did,
join-
yes.
he's going to be joining the club soon. So I know that feeling as my wife looks at me and gives me a smirk. Anyway, but one of the things I learned in the book that you mentioned about Jennifer Aniston and how she still is taking acting classes at this advanced stage in her career, winning an Emmy, winning a Golden Globe. So your book really analyzes the how, right? Like, how did these
Mhm.
people stay on this path of success? You did all this research. Who's that one person that you felt, and I know you allude to Kobe a lot in the book, but like, who's that one person that really just had that drive to like just continue to get past that goal that they set, or even like set the goal, achieve it, and then next goal? Like, who was that person, that one person that you feel like had it?
There's a few people, and if I couldn't mention everybody in the book, just because it would have become, like a regurgitation of a bunch of different stories, and it wouldn't have had any cohesiveness to it. So I purposely didn't include a lot of people, and I also wanted to tie my personal story in there too, and I didn't want to be too confusing. Um, but one person in particular, I call him like my distant business mentor. He just has no idea who I am, but I've analyzed his story 100 different times and know everything about him. Is Rob Deerdeck. So if you guys, a lot of people know him from Ridiculousness. He's MTV's
Yeah, big
face.
in. Yeah.
He's DC. He's a big person to help DC, the shoe and clothing brand, blow up. Fantasy Factory, Robin Big. People know him for like the persona of who Rob Deerdeck is. But when you look at where this guy's from, he's from like the Midwest, a tiny little town. Not a skater town at all. It's not like he was born into the route of success or the route of fame or the route of Hollywood. But his entire life has figured out ways to like overcome the odds. He in high school dropped out and still became like one of the most successful people today. And I think him in particular, I really respect the way he moves and the way he operates, because it's not like there's an end goal for him. And I think that's a commonality that you find with a lot of these successful people, is like they set these goals, they achieve them, and they just keep on moving the goalpost every single time. You know, his story is really cool as well, because when he first came out here to California, I think he was like 17 years old, 16 years old, not even an adult yet, and still figured out like how to move and how to get sponsorships, how to build his brand, how to build his business acumen so young. And now when you look at his empire and what he's done, he has his hands in like 15 different things, and he's able to pick one thing in one business area, pull it, and use it in another area, which I think that in itself is a skill that a lot of people don't have and aren't able to do. You know,
Something we've asked a lot of people that have graciously come on the show is about just lessons along the way. I mean, your book itself is sort of a summation of this, but what is what's a lesson that comes to mind for you that helped you in your growth and development that at the time felt small, maybe not so impactful, but over time you look back on that and say, wow, that kind of really just exploded the equation for me, or just changed my thinking about these larger themes I encounter?
Yeah, that's a great question. I recently did a commencement speech for my alma mater, UC Merced, and at the very end of the speech, I included what I'm about to share with you right now. It's almost like a mindset, like a mental framework again. Like I do a lot of things that I tell myself, an internal monologue that I've told myself, and I picked it up probably about like 6 years ago, 7 years ago. I picked it up early on in life, but I didn't know that I picked it up. It was something that I picked up through my grandparents and seeing them, come to a country where they don't speak the language, and still be able to make a living and more, But the internal monologue is essentially like, just because people like me, or like us, like people from underrepresented groups, don't work in a certain industry or do a certain job or do a certain thing doesn't mean that people like us shouldn't or can't do those things and be really good at them. So when you take that internal monologue or that mental framework, and now you look at everything that I've done through that lens, write a book, be the first in my family to write a book. How many Latino self-development authors are there? I can't name not even 5, you know. Work in tech. I don't know if you guys know this, but the tech industry is not diverse, you know. For the listeners who might not know, there's, I think, about 5% Latinos in the tech industry, and for Black, it's like 3 or 4%. You know, so to be able to work in an industry where it doesn't represent people who look like you or talk like you or come from your background or first generation or whatever, that's extremely difficult. But to be able to have that mental framing going into situations, it's like almost like a can-do attitude on steroids. Like, hey, you know what? It's okay. I got this. I'll be okay. Like, this is a place for me too, and I'm going to pave the way for other people behind me to continue it and do the same. So that's probably one of the most powerful things, and I'll carry that to the grave, basically.
Ish, and by the way, well said. As somebody who works in the tech space that is Latino, and my dad's also in the tech space, so I had somebody kind of to follow behind his footsteps. But you're right, very underrepresented, not only our community but the African American community as well. But I wanted to ask you, it's a new year, right? You write about this in the book about New Year's resolutions, which something I didn't even know, that 80% of people give up on their New Year's resolution by the second week of February, right? And
Yeah, that's February.
You make a reference to James Clear about people are like the sum of their habits.
Mm-hmm.
Why do people give up? Why do people give up so easily on certain things? Why do you feel that is? And obviously, there's obviously factors within their life, but why do you feel that people always tend to give up so easily?
I think it does have to tie back to not only your habits, but your environment. So um, this will be a bad example, but I'm going to say it anyways. Let's say you're trying to quit drinking, right? And you are, for most of your life, you've not been an alcoholic, but maybe you drink casually on the weekends and it's become a habit. Friday comes around, you had a stressful week, have a glass of wine with your wife, have a drink, go out to the club when there's no COVID or whatever, have drinks, everything's all good. And let's say all of a sudden you want to quit drinking, but your environment has been so encouraging for those habits that it almost alienates you to not do them, to not do that thing, right? So now if you've developed a group of friends who expect you, or not only expect you, but when you want to meet up with them, that's where they're going to be, at the bar, at the club, or in environments where alcohol is going to be present. Again, not trying to say that alcohol is good or bad. I'm just, for an example, it'll be really, really difficult. Like, it's going to take more than willpower to like say no every single time. You need to change your environment. And I think a lot of people understand habits at a very skim level, but don't understand that it's 10 layers deeper than just the habits that you have. You know, you can rid your entire closet or like your pantry of all the alcohol. You can tell your wife or your partner, whoever lives with you, don't let me buy any alcohol. That'll be like step one. You set the first layer of your environment. But now what about the social environments that you're around every Thursday, Friday, Saturday? Or when you go to a dinner and everybody else around you is going to be drinking or whatever, it's going to be really hard. So eventually people do crack, you know, because you've built a habit for 10, 12, 15, 20 years of your life. And now you're going to try to break it all of a sudden. So rigidly. It takes more than just like understanding how you built the habit. It takes like supporting it with the environment and the second environment and the third environment, and maybe even cutting out certain friends who push you to do bad habits, you know. And the same thing for other New Year's resolutions. You know, if your New Year's resolution is to work out, well, is there a metric? Is there, like, you're trying to work out X amount of times a year? And what are the factors that are going to be in your way of you achieving that metric? You know, is it your schedule? Is it your work? Is it the fact that you don't have a gym? And then, you know, then all the excuses come up. It's like, oh, I don't have a gym, so I can't do it. Or maybe you get some weights and you work out at home for a little bit, and then you start to tell yourself, like, these are kind of boring workouts. I wish if I had a real gym, then I would keep going. But because of that, I'm not going to. So you don't, and it's actually that what I'm trying to allude to is the last step of the framework, which is support groups. So you can get your habits down, which will get you through the door. But unless you have that final part of the framework, which is your support groups of people that are going to push you through and keep you going and hold you accountable, then it's very easy to say, you know what, F it, I'm going to just forget it. You know, I tried, I gave it 2 months. I gave it 2 months more than I've ever done. I'm good.
Thinking about, your soon to be status as a husband, thinking about the framework that, that you articulate in your book, where do you see yourself growing and developing? And I say this as a person who's now about to be married this will be our seventh year, actually. So I think constantly about thank you. Like constantly for me, it's about, growing and developing as a husband. And also, I have 2 daughters too. So I come to you with that question too, coming out of this book you've provided to us. What do you see as this framework as it applies to yourself as a soon to be spouse, to others who are recent spouses, soon to be married, and the like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the good thing about frameworks, especially frameworks like the one that I laid out in the book, is you can use them for anything, right? You can use it for landing a job. You can use it for becoming a better professional, starting a business, losing weight, and becoming a better spouse. So this is something that I've thought about a lot, actually. And to walk you through a couple of layers in the book, and obviously you guys know a little bit about it. I plan on using a lot of what I write in the book to become better in areas that I'm currently not very strong at. To give you guys a little bit more clarity or more insight as to myself and my personality, I'm an extremist. And that can usually 90% of the time be pretty good when I maneuver it in a certain way, but it can also be my biggest weakness. To give a little bit more context, I enjoy work. I enjoy working. I love the work I do, which makes it makes it not feel like work, and I get engulfed in everything that I do. But for a spouse or for family or for kids, that probably is not the best thing in the world, right? You need that time. Even if the time is optimized to be completely distraction free, you still need a certain amount of time to develop and build a relationship. So I plan on using the framework in the book to not only find support groups and find mentors and find, I've already found a couple of people who don't know who I am, but I analyze how they move in their relationships, and I pick up a lot of advice that they give. That's another one of the reasons why I admire Kobe Bryant and I admire Rob Dyrdek and I admire Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. It's just like, not only are they beasts when it comes to business and life, but they're also really good at like sharing a full 360 view of who they are, and they try to be good people. Or Kobe Bryant, rest in peace, like a good father, and show like you can be a beast on the court, but I don't know if you guys know this, he would always make it to his kids like birthday parties. It didn't matter if he was like on the other side of the country, he would like fly just to make it to that birthday party and then fly back while the rest of the team is probably partying out in the club celebrating. Like that is phenomenal. That's beautiful. So when I have studied these successful people, especially like men, I try to take bits and pieces and learn from as well. So I plan on using the entire framework to be not only a better spouse, but eventually like a better parent or a good parent.
Ish, we're gonna let you get out on this last question because I have found in talking with different people, especially in the tech space, the television space where I work in, there are some people that are out there that are like, I'm achieving moderate success. I'm staying in this lane. I'm doing everything the way I want. And I don't really care if I advance or, if anything else happens, I've got a secure job. Why mess up the apple cart, right? So what would you say to people, especially let's say someone is interested in buying your book, right? And kind of learning, and let's say they kind of want to push themselves, but they don't know how to. What would be your advice to people that are kind of like stuck in that rut, or maybe they don't know that they could achieve this and get to this place, and right now they're here and they've only seen that example throughout their entire life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's like 6 different ways that I want to answer it, but I'll try to go this way first. So in order to know that you can achieve, you need to like self-actualization, right? You need to know that you can achieve, and you need to know that something's even possible. So for a lot of people who maybe grew up in rougher areas, success for them is like making it out of that area. That's what success means, is like maybe buying a car, buying a house for their parent, not knowing that there's so much more that they can achieve, right? So being able to have some layer of comparison, I guess, in a weird way, it's not the best word for it, but being able to compare to something like, hey, there's so much more that I can do, is step one, I think. And then step two, what I would do, which is actually the first part of the framework in the book, is a little thing that I call self-concept. When I studied all these successful people, like one of the first things that I found, or the most common thing that I found in interviews and people that speak about them, is so-and-so is successful because they're so self-aware. And this word drove me crazy when writing the book, because I don't know if you guys have ever tried to, but try Googling how to become self-aware. There's no way to become self-aware. There isn't like an exercise. Self-awareness as itself, as a term, if you look it up, it actually means being able to look in the mirror and understand who that person in the mirror is. Try teaching that to a 10-year-old, become more self-aware, mijo. Like, okay, that's confusing as hell. Now, how am I supposed to become successful if I can't even become self-aware? And that's the first step this person told me to do, So in the book, I basically say, like, self-awareness is a term that's thrown around so much, but what we actually mean when we throw that word around is self-concepts, which is a psychological term. And self-concepts, there are a lot of different self-concepts that we have. Some of them that I break down in the book is, who is your past self? Who is your current self, your present self, today, right now? And who is your future self? You have to be able to look at your identity or your persona in different segments and different pieces, because then is when you can actually break apart who you are and the things that make you tick and why you are the way you are. So for example, when I did this exercise, I've learned so many things about me because I was able to analyze my childhood. And I talked to my parents, and I talked to my grandparents and my aunts and my uncles and my cousins, people that knew me better than I knew myself at the time, or better than I can remember. And what happens is you start to find trends. Like, oh, I realized when I was 12, I really liked doing that thing. For me, it was like selling and marketing and branding. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I really enjoyed doing it. I like going to the swap meet and like trying to get, like, bargaining, basically trying to get Pokemon cards for cheaper price. I thought that was really fun. That's not like normal, but to be able to identify that in your life and say, like, oh, that makes sense now why I like selling, why I like branding, why I like marketing. It makes sense. But unless you do this exercise to like break apart who you were in the past, who you are now, what makes you tick, what makes you happy, what makes you excited, and then what you could be in the future, which goes back to what I mentioned earlier, then you're able to start your journey on like figuring out, well, what goals should I set for myself? I think in the world of social media right now, it's also really dangerous to put other people's goals and aspirations upon yourself, just because everybody's so out there. So by doing this exercise, that allows you to become a lot more clear on like, what is it that I truly want to do in my life or my situation, or given my immediate surrounding, my family, that's what I would do. It's a really deep exercise, but I mean, if people don't want to buy the book, you can just do like Google self-concepts. But I lay it out in the book, and that's the first step of the framework. And then the following is like how to achieve a goal, set a goal, and actually like crush it to make sure that you don't give up after 2 months like most people do.
Yeah. Ish, man, we really appreciate having you on today. Go get his book, How Successful People Get Ish Done, 7-step framework to achieving your goals. You could check out Ish, follow him on social media. He's on Twitter, he's on Instagram. Ish, I really appreciate it, man. Like I said, your story really connected a lot with myself and Nick as well. And we wish you all the best, man, on the engagement. And thanks again.
Thank you all for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, that was Ish Verduzco. Again, his book, How Successful People Get Ish Done, a 7-step framework to achieving your goals. It's out now. You can head to ishverduzco.net and purchase it, or check it out on Amazon. Nick, I really, like I said at the top, and even with Ish, just connected with his story, because obviously being Latino and coming from a household like that, and I know what people in the tech product space kind of look like. They don't look like us. And so his story kind of spoke to me, and he's doing things on his own, almost like in an entrepreneurial sense, writing this book and giving out free advice online. What'd you make of Ish overall?
Yeah, just there's a bunch of things that come to mind for me, because I was blown away by just how personable he was. I mean, the story he tells in the book is fantastic, and the framework is, just really usable and applicable. But in that conversation, that felt just like just three guys just talking about our respective life experiences. For anyone who reads this book, and I would highly recommend that you do, get it. I have it on ebook. Mike's got the paper version or hardcover behind him. And what he presents is this very personal story for him, coupled with just some really powerful life lessons into a framework that we can all use. I just really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed just the different spaces he took us into. The educator in me, always gets, I sort of jump up on my seat when he's talking about him as a student and what he noticed about what was asked of him as a student and what did that mean in terms of a definition of learning that really didn't apply to him, and I would argue doesn't really apply to most people these days in the 21st century. And he owned it, and you could even tell it's like it sort of sat with him like, I wasn't a good student, and like there's a part of me it's like, no, it's not you. There's a larger problem at hand. But his journey as a learner, just that in isolation, was fantastic. And then talking about soon to be a spouse, and just what does that mean in terms of like that life change, but how does the framework connect to that? Very interconnected, very personable.
Yeah.
Just amazing conversation.
Yeah, no, it was a really great conversation. For those of you watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening to us on your audio podcast, hit the subscribe, follow button wherever you listen to us. We're available wherever you get your podcast. Tell your friends about us. Check us out on Instagram at Can We Please Talk Podcast. Check us out on Twitter at Can We Please Talk Podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
I'm Nick Severi.
We'll catch everybody next time.